for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello, I'm Olivia Guthrie. This is your news at 2 o'clock. Ghislaine Maxwell's family have launched an appeal after the British socialite was found guilty of helping Jeffrey Epstein sexually abuse girls. The 60-year-old has been convicted of 5 out of 6 charges in the US after a 3-week trial. Jurors found she lured young girls to be abused by Epstein between 1994 and 2004. Maxwell's sentencing date is yet to be confirmed, but a lawyer for some of her accusers says she faces a long time in jail.
These 4 women were believed, and now Ghislaine Maxwell is a convicted sex trafficker facing the rest of her life probably in prison because of the courage, the tremendous courage of these 4 women, and also the hard work of the police and the prosecutors and the attorneys who brought this case to justice.
The NHS is due to set up Nightingale Hospital surge hubs in England to prepare for increasing cases of Omicron. Work on 8 hubs holding up to 100 patients each will start this week. The NHS is also ramping up the use of virtual wards at home, where patients get monitoring technology and regular check-ins with clinicians. Well, nurses who are exhausted and overwhelmed by the pandemic are regularly working 12-hour shifts to keep the NHS afloat. A Royal College of Nursing survey of 9,000 staff has found that 74% regularly work beyond their shifts, mostly unpaid. The poll was carried out in October before Omicron hit. Many are unhappy with the quality of care they can provide due to inadequate staffing, and 60% are thinking of quitting. Joyce Pinfield, the vice chairman of the National Care Association, says the workforce are struggling. The Liverpool women's hospital bomber died from the explosion and fire caused by the improvised device he manufactured with murderous intent. That's what a coroner has ruled. Iraqi-born Ahmad al-Swialmeen was killed when the bomb he made went off with him inside the taxi. The driver, David Perry, survived the blast. The bombing came shortly before 11 a.m. on Remembrance Sunday. The coroner said it remained unclear as to whether he intended for the device to detonate when it did. From January, insurers will no longer be able to charge existing customers more to renew than they would new customers. It follows a review by the Financial Conduct Authority that found many insurers were increasing prices for renewing customers in a practice known as price walking. It's expected to save consumers £4.2 billion over the next 10 years. The average UK house price is now 16% higher than before the pandemic. The typical price of a home reached a record high of almost £255,000 in December. That's an increase of just under £24,000 in a year. The Nationwide Building Society says it's the biggest increase ever recorded in a single year. Wales saw the greatest increase, with house prices on average up by 15.8%. That's your update. I'll be back with more in an hour.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there. As we approach a New Year's Eve, things look decidedly mild, wet for some, and a fair amount of cloud. But today we've seen some favoured spots, seeing summer brighter weather. But this weather front straddles more central parts of the country, moving slowly northwards, bringing with it some high rainfall totals as we head into a New Year's Eve. And you can see it's rather windy across many parts of the country. So through Thursday evening and overnight, you can see this rain moving up towards northern England, southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some heavy bursts to come, and we will see the highest rainfall totals for the Lake District, as well as Dumfries and Galloway. Further south, more rain returns to Wales as well as the West Country. By dawn tomorrow, will be across central southern England, pushing quite quickly towards the southeast, as well as the Midlands and East Anglia. It's a mild night, leading into a mild start to New Year's Eve. Through the day then tomorrow, we'll see this rain just stall across central and southern parts of Scotland, as well as northern England. It will dry up across Northern Ireland, even some brighter skies further south across England and Wales, as well as the far northeast of Scotland. And even where we see this rain, it will fade as we head through into evening time. So if you are stepping out through a New Year's Eve evening, it's worth noting the winds will pick up further strength, particularly towards the west. It'll be mostly dry, perhaps some drizzly bits and pieces over the southern uplands as well as Pennine districts, before more rain arrives through the latter part of the night across northern England as well as Scotland. And again, that will push through quite quickly with that strong wind. It will be an exceptionally mild start to 2022. But we will again see some showers move in from the west, brighter skies ahead of it, and again that keen breeze with gales across western-facing coasts. All in all, temperatures will hold up in double figures away from the north. But as we head into Sunday, things turn very windy in the south and colder from the north. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
"2021 is drawing to a close. Thank goodness, I'm sure many will say. Rather like 2020, another year that somewhat blurs because of the stop-start nature of the pandemic. Perhaps this year not quite as bad as last. One big event this year, of course, was on the 20th of June 2021, a new political programme on GBNews started called The Political Correction. And I was there with Deanna, with Paul, and Arlene joined us shortly thereafter. We're going to have a look back at 2021, about the big things that happened. What happened in politics in 2021? Was it a year in which we began to lose faith once again in our elected representatives? What a year for the royal family. I mean, the death of Prince Philip, Megxit, fully completed, much to discuss there. COVID, of course, dominated so much of our lives, and as the year ends, some quite dire predictions of where we could go over the course of the next few months. And for every house in the land, for the first time in 40 years, inflation is back and people are seeing it. The cost of living's rising, their taxes are about to go up, the economy suddenly got very real again. And of course on the world stage, Joe Biden, the 46th president of the USA, the Afghanistan debacle, and we end the year with 100,000 Russian troops lined up on the Ukrainian border. Arlene Foster, at the beginning of 2021, you were the First Minister of Northern Ireland. And you finished the year without that heavy responsibility. You're here with us at GBNews, which we're thrilled. I mean, when the year started, in January, and you were talking about lockdowns in Northern Ireland, and you were laying down the law that people were going to be locked down until, I think it was at least March you were talking about being locked down until, wasn't it?
Yeah, Nigel, it's been a year I'll not forget in a hurry. It's been, to quote Dickens, the best of times. It's been the worst of times, if I can say it in that fashion. Sometimes I use that phrase to describe mandatory coalition in Northern Ireland, actually. But, you know, I started the year as a First Minister. Very quickly in April, there was a heave against me. Instead of trying to stay and fight, I said, look, it's time to do something different. And that something different is here. And frankly, the change into having these sorts of discussions is a new challenge. I'm really enjoying it, but it just goes to show that you need to have more than just a political life. You need to have a bigger story to tell, and I'm really enjoying being here and being with you guys every Sunday.
But was it, you know, when the year started, you know, you imagined you'd still be there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, nobody foresees that sort of end, but I mean, we all know that politics and political leadership always has to come to an end. Mine ended a little bit more quickly, I think, than a lot of people would have predicted, including myself. But you know what? It's fine. You have to take it and move on to the next thing, because you can either take it in one of two ways. You can either become very bitter and insular about the issue, or you can say, well, if that's what you want, that's fine. I'll move on and do something else.
No, and things change. I mean, Deanna,
absolutely.
You know, in January of this year, you were a Boris Johnson loyalist.
You're implying I'm not a Boris Johnson loyalist at the moment.
It doesn't look
Nigel.
like it.
Yeah, I think there's a difference, isn't there, between rebelling on policy and kind of taking a stance
Yeah.
against the leader. I think the two things are very different and should be kept very distinct. But it's been a tough year. I mean, I don't envy the Prime Minister, the job he's had. You know, trying to govern COVID as one thing in and of itself is really difficult. He's been sort of trying to continue with the Brexit negotiations, which I know you would argue should have been completed before we left, but still, I think
Absolutely.
trying to get that deal over the line in time and get it over the line with kind of a new parliament was really important. Yeah, I don't envy the man at all. He's had a really rough ride, but it's not been easy for we backbenchers either.
I think leadership's always tough. You know. But the big political change in January, I guess, wasn't here. It was in America. And it was the inauguration of Joe Biden. And there he was. America is back. We're rejoining the global community. It was Paul, what was that? Was that a return to the old ways of doing things? Does it mean that Trump was just an aberration? Or is Joe Biden the aberration?
I think that the Democrats, and I think generally the left across the world and the liberal community across the world, do see Trump still as an aberration. They think that American voters took leave of their senses and they voted in someone who wasn't fit to govern, and now the normal order of things has been restored. Now, I mean, I have no time for Trump as a person particularly. I'm not his greatest fan by any stretch.
Oh, he's a great guy.
Well, I knew you would say that, of course. You got an exclusive interview with him. You've got to butter him up naturally. But the truth was, he did speak for millions of people in Left Behind America. He spoke for working class Americans. Whether or not his policies would benefit them in the long run, they saw him as speaking for their interests, you know, provincial America. And I think the danger really for the Democrats is that they think that, you know, it's just now normal service again, and that the election of Biden will naturally heal the wounds. I don't think it has healed the wounds. I think the divisions that existed under Trump are still there. I think the left behind communities of America who have been affected by globalization in a big way and who look to Trump as some sort of savior still feel the way they did. So in terms of the divisions across the United States, I think we're going to still see those playing out for some years to come.
It's very interesting because that narrative that Trump was a short-term aberration, the voters had taken leave of their senses, is exactly what Blair and others, your former leader,
Thanks.
and others. By the way, are there any Labour leaders you have liked in the last 25 years?
Attlee. Now, I know we're going back a few years.
On, none of us. I wasn't born then.
I know we're going back a few years. I mean, if you look at I said we'd get on to talking about the war, and we have. I mean, Attlee, I think the Labour government of 45 was a radical reforming government that did a huge amount of good for this country. And, you know, if you said to me who's the best Labour leader of all time, I think I would say Clement Attlee. I mean, look, Blair did some really good things. If you're on the left, as I am, you look at the investment in schools and hospitals and so on. then you have to pat him on the back. But I don't think that Blair challenged the economic consensus in this country. I don't think he shifted the balance of wealth and power in favour of ordinary working people.
Well, the opposite.
Well, exactly. And with a 179 seat majority, which he had in 97, he had every opportunity to do that. So look, I don't condemn him, but he's certainly part of that group of people who embraced the global market and what all of that meant for working class.
I was teasing you. I was teasing a bit. So Deanna, February, I think it is that miserable month. The weather can be at its worst. The days are still incredibly short. It's merciful that it only lasts 28 days in the minds of many people. And this year, it was February in lockdown. Any thoughts back on how grim February was for your constituents?
It feels so long ago, doesn't it?
Yeah,
sort of
weird.
10 months and it feels forever. Yeah, I mean, I think it was really difficult, particularly because we were in this lockdown and we saw no light at the end of the tunnel. There was no kind of exit plan really at that point. We didn't know what was going to happen next. We didn't know what was going to unlock, whether kids would be able to kind of properly go back to school, whether hospitality businesses were going to properly reopen, whether they'd survive. It was really difficult. So much uncertainty, I think, is kind of a theme of this year in some ways, but particularly in that early stage of the year. Firstly, when it's long, dark nights, the weather's rubbish anyway, and you're stuck at home, can't even go down the pub for a pint kind of thing. It was so difficult.
It did feel like, didn't it? It did feel like the horizon was a very, very long way away.
Yeah.
It was a pretty dark time, but look, I think the move then towards dealing with, is there a route out of lockdown? We were all told the vaccine was the route out of lockdown. No doubt we'll return to that later on in the programme. I remember making those statements as well as all the other devolved leaders urging people to get their vaccine because that was the route out.
And actually, we were doing rather well with vaccine rollout, weren't we? I mean, this was one thing Brexiteers could say, because if we'd been part of the European Union, there was a failed Conservative politician from Cyprus who was in charge of the rollout. And one of the things Number 10 got right was to appoint this remarkable woman, Kate Bingham, who'd been successful in private business before, who did the job for 6 months and then left. I mean, he really got that right, didn't he?
Completely. I mean, involving the private sector in the way that we did, basically saying, we'll foot the bill if you can make it happen, was absolutely the right approach. And the speed of that rollout was really phenomenal, particularly, comparing it to other sort of nearby neighbours, really quite astonishing. And I think it really gave the nation hope. I think that's probably coming towards the end of February. I think that's probably what I remember the most, was the hope of how well the vaccination programme was going, but also hope from having this 4-stage plan of this is how we are going to get past this is how we are going to emerge from this really dark period.
So in March, many of us, with utter horror, Deanna, watched the Harry and Meghan show.
Some of us didn't.
You didn't watch it?
No, I did not.
Well,
absolutely not.
Well, I have to say I did.
Me too.
It was extraordinary because it struck me that it was an all-out attack on the institution itself.
It's how it felt watching it. And I think, in Britain, the vast majority of people have so much respect and outright respect for the royal family and the institution, that to see that, I think, for a lot of people was quite shocking.
Do we respect the royal family? Or do we respect the Queen?
I think a lot of that is the Queen. I mean, her sense of duty and public service throughout her incredibly long reign is astonishing. I can't think of anyone else who better sums up that notion of public service than Her Majesty.
It has been remarkable. I mean, I know that Paul would rather have President Kinnock than...
At least you can get rid of him.
You have to move away from me.
That's the thing.
But isn't that what it would be?
Well, no, I don't agree with that. I mean, I think Her Majesty the Queen has been an incredible matriarch of the family. But are you seriously saying that there are other members of the family that don't do good? Look at Princess Anne, my goodness, the amount of work that she does in a very uncelebrated way, a very unglitzy way. She gets on with it, she does it, as indeed do many other members of the family. So, I mean, I do think it's wrong to just say, that it's just the Queen. That's not true. But
I think she comes from a certain era and she represents a certain tradition, that kind of
it is
stiff
service.
upper lip.
Duty, service,
loyalty to country.
Never explain, never complain.
All of that. And I think that's the part of the institution that the public respects, and I think she carries that off very well. as I said, if you're going to have a monarch, then she's probably as good a monarch as you're going to get.
Well, do you know what? Through the centuries, the royal family has been through extraordinary ups and downs. And actually, we forget that republicanism in this country, in terms of changing it from monarchy to republic, it's probably been at its lowest levels for centuries. Now, trust in the police is obviously a really, really important issue. The shocking discovery of the murder of Sarah Everard back in March, and the body being found down in these woods near Ashford in Kent, the fact that Wayne Couzens, a serving police officer, who actually been, at a very high level, a gun-carrying police officer, had been responsible, was clearly an awful case. I just wondered, looking back at that, did anything positive come out of it?
I think one of the positive things, if you can see it as such, was how it gave so many other predominantly young women the confidence to actually come out and speak about their own experiences, to help shed some light on how big an issue kind of sexual violence against women is. Because a lot of people keep it quiet. They're ashamed to speak up. They think that they might be kind of victim shamed or whatever it might be for actually speaking out about their own experiences. But so many people found the bravery to do that, which has led to actually some big changes in government, more money going to local councils to tackle this stuff, the development of a new app so women can pinpoint areas where they don't feel safe, so resource can go into those areas, and a much wider recognition of how big an issue this is. I had male friends of mine say to me, I had no idea you had to go through that so regularly.
It was a very difficult situation because, of course, the circumstances of the murder was just so evil. I mean, the man stopped her, arrested her, and then abducted her. And I mean, obviously, when you and I were growing up, Nigel, the police were figures of authority and people had respect for them. And I think one of the things I was really struck by was actually the loss of authority for police officers. And events like this actually add to all of that. You can't trust the police. And we've been through moments like that in the past, whether it's been racism or homophobia, and now we were with it in terms of violence against women and girls. And it was just so shocking at the time.
It was absolutely horrendous. But I think the point needs to be made even now that it was a very, very isolated incident. I mean, it was unprecedented for a police officer to abduct a woman from the street and then
It's so hard to say that,
go and
Paul.
murder. Well, it shouldn't be.
But at the time, to say that was almost as if you were complicit.
Perhaps it was, but it was
Or
clearly,
belittling the issue.
it was clearly an isolated incident. And my fear at the time and now is that we then create this climate where we tell women in this country to be distrustful of police officers. Now, I've got a daughter, and I would like to think that if my daughter is walking the streets at night and she feels threatened or something and she sees a police officer, that she would be comfortable about approaching that police officer and asking for assistance.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk. Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
And then we got to April, and I think the first kind of major thing to happen in April was the very tragic death of Prince Philip.
Yeah.
Which, you know, we knew he was of age, we knew he was unwell, but still I think it came as a huge shock to the nation, didn't it?
I deserted the country by then. I'd had enough. I couldn't see lockdown ever ending. And I left in early April. I had to do a 2-week quarantine in the Caribbean. Before getting,
It's a hard life.
Stop.
Before getting into America. So I was away for 2 months. What was really interesting, what was being in the Caribbean when the news of Philip's death came through, and being over there, a couple of things struck me. You know, this was a former British colony, and you know, taxi drivers, despite the fact they'd sort of got their independence years ago, still talking about my Queen. That connection was remarkable.
But they would have remembered Philip and
of course, he was a respected figure, you know, distinguished service, mentioned in dispatches World War II, been there all the way through the whole thing. So I was very struck by that. I suppose my abiding memory of it, apart from being over there, just watching the Queen on her own in that chapel. I mean, Keir Starmer since has talked about it as giving an example to the nation of how to deal with social distancing rules. I thought it was quite hard to watch.
Incredibly hard to
tiny.
watch.
Didn't she?
I thought she looked so small in her little seat in that huge building. It was heartbreaking, actually. I just thought it was really, really sad.
It was. I mean, in many respects, again, I'll say this as someone who's not a royalist, but it was the end of an era. It was the end of a certain type of royal, wasn't it? The stiff upper lip duty, tradition, etc. The famous British Reserve. That is what Prince Philip embodied. Never explain, never complain. And you know what struck me actually was his wartime service. I mean, he genuinely did have a distinguished war record. And as you said, Nigel mentioned in dispatches, this wasn't somebody who just kind of signed up nominally because it looked good on the record. This was somebody who was on the front line in the Royal Navy and was you know, facing German aeroplanes coming over and trying to bomb the ship.
Wanted to pursue a naval career. So he marries the young princess. He marries the young princess. And when they got married, 1947 they got married, he had every logical reason to think they'd have 25 years married before it was her turn to become the monarch. And he was going to pursue his naval career, and he had ambitions to go all the way to be an admiral. And of course, King George VI dies at 56 years old. And suddenly, she's thrust into the position of being queen, and he effectively has to give up his life.
And had no idea at that stage. He gave an interview I saw where he said he had no idea at that stage what his role was actually going to be, because I think the last person who found himself in that position was probably Prince Albert at the time. So he said, you know, there was nobody who came in and gave him a brief and said, this is what you had to do. He said, I had to make it up as I went along, and he pursued his particular causes that he was passionate about. But again, if you're going to have a Queen's consort, then he would be as good as an example, I think.
I thought it was incredible. And during the run up to the funeral, we learned so much about Prince Philip that a lot of people hadn't known about. I mean, its breadth of involvement in the World Wildlife Fund, the fact that he was there at the very beginning. You then start to think, oh, Charles is getting his environmental credentials actually from his father, who was interested in all of that at the very beginning. So I thought it was an incredible life. My goodness, well lived, filled with activity, not just lounging around and being the Queen's consort, but actually purposeful.
Yeah.
And really full.
The great thing about him to a certain degree is he was unreconstructed, wasn't he?
Yes.
You know, he wouldn't have had any time. He didn't have any time for wokery and pouring out your feelings on national television. You know, he would have, I think, really opposed all of that, and did oppose all of that sort of stuff.
He was old
and
school.
that's the kind, if we're going to have a monarchy, that's the sort of monarchy
he was old school, and very interestingly, you know, here we are, December, the end of the year. Tom Bower, you know, who is a shrewd observer of people, and of course writes these biographies, and a lot of them are, you know, big best-selling books. And he's said in the last week that he thinks Prince Philip not being there actually is one of the reasons that the wheels are coming off the firm. At the firm, as the royal family are known. And if you look at it, I mean, goodness me, they have got problems in all sorts of directions. And it was interesting, even you know, learning years later that even in her great difficulty, Diana felt he was somebody who could be a trusted confidant to go and sit down with her. And so we sort of speculated already about what, you know, the Queen's role is, and we don't like to talk about it, but what might happen if she's not here. But maybe he's actually a bigger loss to the institution than perhaps we've recognised today.
Yeah. Well, speaking about one institution and moving to a different one that I think, Paul, you might be a bit more interested in, we hit stage 3 of Unlock, and finally you could go and absolutely freeze your bum off sitting in a beer garden with a number of friends. And I must admit, that first pint on 12th of April, he was fine. I'm talking to you guys here. That first pint, 12th of April, scarf, hat, gloves on, everything was so worth it.
Some comical memes where the rain and sleet coming down and all the rest of it.
But people did it because I think they felt so cooped up for so long that suddenly given the opportunity to break free from those restrictions, even if it was -5 wherever they were, they thought, well, that's it, I'm going down the pub and I'm having a pint of lager. So we come to May, the story of the inquiry by Lord Dyson into the events surrounding the interview by Martin Bashir of Princess Diana in 1995, and found that he was guilty of deceit in the way that he conducted that interview. That was a bit of a hammer blow for the BBC, wasn't it, Arlene? I mean, was it a nail in the coffin of the BBC, do you think?
Well, not a nail in the coffin, but I think it was certainly the start of a conversation about the BBC. I mean, up until then, the BBC, even with Savile and everything else, you know, it was still seen to be the institution that it always has been, Lord Reith's institution, as it were. But I think now, and certainly in the latter half of the year, people are starting to look at the BBC and ask more questions than they've ever done before. And Bashir himself has continued to fall, as we've seen just very recently in relation to all of this. So, I mean, there are huge questions about the BBC, and more I am meeting people who are talking about, why are we paying a licence fee to these people when they're not impartial? They're supposed to be an impartial organisation. They're not impartial. And more people are having that conversation.
I mean, I was struck by an interview that Andrew Marr, of all people, I mean, a BBC man through and through, obviously, gave a few years ago, where he said that the BBC as an institution is infused with cultural liberalism, and it sees everything through that prism. I mean, I love the BBC. I'm a BBC man, although I accept that it has got major problems and doesn't speak for many parts of our country. You'd probably like to defund the BBC completely and get rid of it.
Paul, I have grown up with the BBC.
Yeah, as we all have.
Of course I have.
As we all have.
I've been a news hound all my life.
You must love Test Match Special as a BBC institution.
My greatest honour, forget meeting, you know, the Pope and the Dalai Lama and Donald Trump, and forget all that.
That was a good party that night.
I was guest of the day with Jonathan Agnew on Test Match Special, a Saturday lunchtime during a Test match. I've listened to Ted Spencer for 50 years. Of course, there are bits of the BBC I've grown up with.
Yeah.
Bits of it I love. And I still think around the world, particularly through BBC World Service, it's still actually, in terms of our push and our reach as a country, is terribly important. So look, I still think the BBC is part of the Global Britain brand. I wouldn't abolish it altogether. I really, really wouldn't. But I don't really see why the BBC is allowed, for example, on FM radio, to hold these vast bandwidths that keep everybody else out. Now, by the way, GBNews, of course, is going out in the new year on DAB, which is an exciting new development. So they've still got some very big inbuilt privileges and advantages. I personally think the BBC licence fee should either be abolished completely or reduced down to a minimal 30, £35 a year. So Arlene, June 2021, a very dramatic moment in your life.
Well, obviously in April I had declared my intention to resign as First Minister because there'd been a push against me within the Democratic Unionist Party. So on the 14th of June I stepped down as First Minister of Northern Ireland. I mean, it had been a huge privilege and pleasure to be the First Minister of Northern Ireland. Obviously for me, coming from Northern Ireland, a Northern Ireland girl, it had been wonderful. But it came to an end on the 14th of June in 2021.
How did it feel waking up on the 15th of June?
Oh my goodness, I hadn't thought about that before, Nigel. Do you know what? In many ways, you either treat it and you get really down about these things because you've reached the top position in Northern Ireland and now you're no longer in that position. I actually found it quite liberating because there had been incredible pressure around COVID-19 and doing the right thing. And were we doing the right thing in relation to businesses and people's health care and all of that? So actually, 15th of June was okay.
Was Enoch Powell right when he said that all political careers end in failure? I'm not saying your career ended in failure, by the way, but that's what he
misquoted
said.
on this.
He is, I think, yeah.
He said all political careers end in failure unless they are cut off midstream. I'm convinced.
You were cut off midstream, clearly, weren't you, Arnie?
I'm convinced that Tony Blair had that in his mind when he got out.
Yeah.
Because Blair got out. If you think about it, within a year, the financial crash had happened. You know, Blair got out at the top. So that was the point that he made. If you keep going in politics forever, in the end, it's going to be very tough and very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, all political careers and all political leadership times come to an end. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. And I think if you're in a situation of political leadership, you know that it's for a limited period of time.
Yeah.
You know it's not going to go on forever. And therefore, you do your best when you're in the position. And then when you're not in the position, you move on, you do something different.
It's a bit like football managers, isn't it? Very rarely do they leave the job to the applause of fans and
they hardly
people
ever do.
Cheering them to the rafters. They usually
It's
go.
all in retrospective.
Of course, they usually go because people have had enough of them, to be honest, and they've edged them out.
Well, there was, of course, another departure in June, wasn't there?
Well, it was, but June was
slightly
Matt
more
Hancock.
dramatic departure.
Do you think it was more dramatic than me?
It's a lot more visible.
I mean, it's Matt Hancock month, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we kicked the month off with the announcement that there were 0 COVID deaths.
That's
wow.
correct.
Hooray.
It was
And it's all
incredible.
looking good. And we know that the easing, Freedom Day is coming.
Yep.
And it takes longer to come than we want.
Yeah, we've got a bit of a delay, but still,
But
it
we
was
know
coming.
it's coming.
Yep.
And then, of course, it finishes up with Hancock the Snogger. And all the rest of it.
Cautious snogging.
Yeah, that video, it haunts me.
Not-
It haunts me to this
Not much,
Not as much as it haunts him.
Yeah.
I think the thing about the video, I have no interest in Matt Hancock's personal life at all. But again, as we've discussed on the show many times, it's the hypocrisy thing.
Yeah.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
So normally on the 11th of July, guys, I'm busy preparing for the 12th, but this year my sister was home from England and the TV was on. It must have been a devastating 11th of July, Paul.
Well, it was. It was the Euro 2020, which obviously was delayed for a year, and we'd waited so long since 1966, of course, for England to win a major football competition. And when the England team is doing well, it does manage to unite the nation almost in a way that nothing else ever can, really.
Freedom Day came on the 19th then, Deanna,
It did.
in terms of COVID.
But seeing the pure look of joy on people's faces, I was still quite cautious. I was still lateral flow testing like 3-4 times a week at that point, just to be safe. And so I knew that if the test was to be believed, didn't have any signs of COVID. It was just amazing. It really felt like normality.
So high summer comes, August, and for the first time really in 2021, international affairs impinge upon us. The 46th President of the USA, Joe Biden, known by some as Sleepy Joe, decides he is unilaterally going to withdraw the remaining 3,000 troops from Afghanistan. Now, for lots of us, we were thinking, why the hell have we been there for 20 years?
Yeah.
Although what I did learn was that actually since 2014, the Americans and the Brits had been providing backup support. The fighting was being done by the Afghan army itself. Anyway, Biden decides they're out, does it with no consultation with us whatsoever. No consultation with NATO. It leaves the British government in a bind. We kind of have no option but to get out as well. And here we are, several months down the road. The Taliban are back in charge. Donald Trump is banned from Twitter. The Taliban leadership is still active on Twitter.
The broader question, I guess, is the whole kind of principle, the policy of interventionism, liberal interventionism in other countries. Does it work? Can we bomb countries into democracy? Can we, by military force, turn countries into the type of countries that we want to see and we want to live with? Or are we better off just saying, look, we probably are just better off out of this?
I mean, the devastating thing, I think, for particularly women and girls in Afghanistan is that they were given a view of what could be.
Yes.
And they started to go into education, they started to appear on television. We have a number of females who are elected as parliamentarians. they're all in hiding now. Most of them are out of the country, living in exile in Greece and places like that. I think there's only a very small number that still in Afghanistan, but in hiding. Let's be clear about that. So it's almost as if they're shown what it could be, and then it's taken away from them.
So we move on to September, and we learn that the government is going to raise national insurance by 1.25% to pay for social care reforms. Pretty controversial, Deanna, wasn't it?
It was. You know, on the one hand, actually tackling social care was a really big deal. Because this is something where the can's been kicked down the road for so long by so many successive governments to actually try and grasp and tackle this issue where we do have an ageing population and the cost of social care needs addressing. But to do it with a plan that probably won't necessarily tackle the issues in the long run, and by raising taxes when people are already facing a massive kind of cost of living hit, to me seemed pretty unreasonable. So I became a rebel for the second time in my parliamentary career, winning lots of favours with party whips at the moment. But it was a small rebellion. I expected a lot more. There was a lot of anger amongst the backbenchers.
Ever since the Tories have been in, the tax squeeze on the middle has been utterly astonishing.
And yet on the lowest earners, there have been massive tax savings.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think, Deanna, I think the increase in the levels at which people should start to be taxed, and I'd campaigned for that for years and thrilled to see it. But the squeeze middle is now squeezed in quite a remarkable way. But it raises a bigger question. Is this even a Conservative party? You know, it's a party that's obsessed with all sorts of liberal ideas. The obsession with climate change, the obsession that we must make people pay 10,000 quid for new heat pumps in their homes and everything else, and COP26. So it's green, it's uber liberal, and now it raises taxes. And they carry on with this charade that we're the party of low taxes. And that, interestingly, this was the moment. I think this was the moment.
No, I think you're right.
That the real conversation about what is the Conservative Party under Boris Johnson began. It wasn't really there before that. But ever since that moment, it has. And it's led us right through to where we are today and to various rebellions today.
It was always, I mean, Arlene, it was always the Conservative and Unionist party, wasn't it? I mean, you're a Unionist. Do you associate with the Conservative Party? Can you see yourself aligning with today's Conservative Party?
Well, of course, we have the Northern Ireland Protocol, which we haven't touched on in this programme yet. And it was around this time that the pressure started to look at Article 16. Of course, the command paper came out in July saying that the circumstances were there to trigger Article 16 to bring the protocol back into negotiations. It still hasn't been triggered. And actually, I think Boris is missing a trick here now, because he should be triggering it and saying, I'm standing up for the union. This is something I really do believe in. And therefore, I'm triggering Article 16 because the internal market of the United Kingdom has been disrupted by the European Union. But he hasn't done it to date. In terms of the tax for social care, let's talk about reform of the NHS, because, you know, we have really valued the NHS during COVID. We have bigged it up in terms of the vaccine programme and the fact that people were there when we had a real crisis in terms of the pandemic. But it needs reformed. And there's nobody having that conversation, because people on the left, Paul, don't want to have the conversation about reform, because when they see reform, they see cuts. And that's why they don't want
privatisation.
I think that's the problem. As a Conservative, whenever you start speaking about wide-scale reform of the NHS, many on the left do instantly jump down your throat and say, you just want to privatise. And it's like, well, no, there may be a place for the private sector in the NHS, but we need to be able to have this debate to figure out what matters most and how we're going to get the best outcomes for patients.
The other thing that happened that quite shocked us, I think, and it took a couple of days for it to really come out, was Remembrance Sunday. The maternity unit in Liverpool, the bomber, exactly the role of the taxi driver, what happened, was the target the maternity unit, was the target the cenotaph service down the road? We still don't know.
Well, I remember speaking to you from Enniskillen that day, of course, Nigel, and I asked to be in Enniskillen that day because I always like to be there, given the significance of what happened there 34 years ago. And I could not believe that something like that was happening in Liverpool. It was a real shock.
It was.
It was, what I find staggering even today is the lack of debate there was after the incident about the potential motives for what happened and what the effects might have been had the attack been successful. I mean, here you had a person who appeared to have gone to, of all places, a maternity hospital where there were dozens of women and newborn babies, and presumably, and I don't think it's unreasonable to presume it, would, if he could have got out of the car, entered the premises and detonated that bomb, that explosive, and done the most horrific damage that doesn't bear thinking about.
And so to December, the last month of the year. But unfortunately, it brought us one of the most horrific stories of the year with little Arthur Labinjo Hughes, and the fact that he had been murdered by his stepmother, although she wasn't obviously married to his father. And the father was convicted for manslaughter, 21 years. She was given 29 years. It was a horrific case. Not just the physical abuse, but the psychological abuse that was visited upon this little boy of 6 years of age. It was just so very difficult to take in. And it brought us back to the fact that lockdown had an impact on so many young people. They weren't allowed to go to school, they weren't allowed to socialise, they weren't subject to interventions that could have been helpful to them.
I mean, I'm a parent, and you look at these. I found it genuinely difficult to read the detail of this story. I mean, it was absolutely horrific. And I saw a poll in the wake of the convictions that suggested that 52% of the country still believed that capital punishment was an appropriate response for children.
Shows you how strongly people feel.
I find it very difficult to say that those people are being unreasonable, actually. I mean, I know capital punishment is a huge debate, and there's no chance of it coming back, let's be honest about that. But when you look at the people who visited this pain and suffering on an innocent child, does a punishment fit the crime? I don't think it does in this case.
Yeah.
I think social attitudes have moved on significantly. And I don't think even I'd support it now. I would have done 30 years ago, but I wouldn't now. Even if short term, in emotional response to what people have seen, a majority say they're in favour.
It's a non-starter, that's certainly true. But I don't like the way that the debate on this subject is skewed by people who oppose the death penalty and think they have a monopoly of compassion on the issue. Actually, people who support it, and I get that it's a divisive debate, I do understand that, but people who support it because they look at cases like this, and they look at people like Ian Huntley, for example, who murdered those two schoolgirls in Soho, and they are so moved by the suffering and the trauma of the victims and their families that they think actually the person who perpetrated that should not be allowed actually to live the rest of their natural life. So we, if we're going to have the debate, at least let us not do it on the basis that one side, i.e. the side who opposes the death penalty, has a monopoly of compassion on it, because I don't think they do.
No, actually. I think
I know, but it's December. Come on, it's party time.
December. We've moved a long way from Hartlepool.
Well, yeah, I mean, but December 2020 was party time. Big time. All over Downing Street, Westminster, Conservative Central Office. The country was locked down, but they were going for gold, weren't they, the government? Indeed, even reports that the party in Central Office didn't end till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. A door was broken, scenes of mass drunkenness, let alone the party on the 18th, which took place in Downing Street, up to 50 attendees, including, we're certain, some quite senior members of the press. Mr. Doyle, who is now, the Prime Minister's senior press spokesman, giving out the prizes, Secret Santa, wine and cheese. Then we got the 13th of November, the day that Lee Kane and Dominic Cummings get the boot, supposedly, because the wicked Carrie has planned it all. And then that night, Emma Johnson's flat, Carrie hosts a party for 13 people, all completely in breach of the rules. It's party time. It's fabulous. Rest of us can't visit elderly relatives or do anything. And then when they're questioned on it, the Prime Minister just lies and lies and lies again, as if it doesn't matter. And it kind of does matter, doesn't it? the Allegra Stratton, well, it wasn't just her fault, was it? I mean,
No.
she's carried the can, but it was cringe-making, the whole thing, wasn't it?
Yeah. But I think with Allegra Stratton, she's almost been made a scapegoat of the whole thing. And I mean, I have to say, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that somebody felt it necessary to leak that footage. Because if we're honest, look, we've all said stuff in private company with our work colleagues that we've had a bit of a laugh and a joke about, black humour a little bit, that we wouldn't necessarily, I mean, I've done it, we've all done it, that we wouldn't necessarily want to be broadcast on the national media. And if it were broadcast on the national media,
Paul.
we'd be caught out.
Have we laughed and joked about breaking the law and getting away with it?
Well, I think what she was doing in that situation, and by the way, I think the government is guilty of hypocrisy on this. Let me say that clearly. But I think what she was doing is she was giving a sort of a press conference, which was a bit of a trial run, and some of her colleagues were firing questions at her. And one of them said something, and she had a bit of a joke about it. Oh, was there a cheese and a wine party? That was an off-the-cuff comment that she thought was said between friends, a sort of remark that we have all made. So I do have sympathy for her, because I don't think she necessarily did that maliciously.
Okay.
And she has carried the can for people higher up who are certainly guilty of hypocrisy. And it's almost like she's been used as chaff, really, to deflect the blame from them. The problem for the government is they have taken this hard line over the last 18 months or so, where they've said, you must follow these rules. And they have launched this propaganda blitz, and it's been going on for 18 months or more. You must follow these rules. If you don't, you're going to kill Granny. You're going to overwhelm the NHS. You're going to make sure that the NHS isn't able to cope. And then if they are found breaching the same rules that they are drilling into other people they must abide by, what excuse have they got? How can they complain when people then highlight their hypocrisy? That's exactly where we are, I think, with this.
How much trouble is the government in?
Well, it depends whether his colleagues, and it's his colleagues that are important. Labour can shout, the media can say whatever they want, but it's Boris's colleagues that are key in all of this. So if his colleagues decide that he's still an electoral asset to them, as he was in 2019, and we've talked about the election, then he'll remain. If they decide he's more of a liability, then things will change. I think actually it's in the balance at this moment in time, and I think Boris will want to get a grip on Downing Street and move the story on to something else. If he can do that, then he'll survive.
This time next year, Arlene, will Boris Johnson still be Prime Minister?
I think it's in the balance, and I know we're in the realms of predictions now. It just depends over the next couple of weeks whether he can get a real grip.
Probably not.
Probably not. Deanna?
The bigger
you are compromised by this.
Not to deflect like politicians do, but the bigger question for me, Nigel, is are we going to see a Nigel Farage comeback in 2019?
God. You see, I mean, it's genius, isn't it? I'm just Joe Public. I'm just Joe Public sitting here quietly, and
quietly.
You have never
quietly anywhere.
I have to say, I think that the Conservative Party is in dire trouble. I think it's gone so far away. Here's the tragedy. Brexit, to me, Brexit was the first step of modernising British politics, of revolutionising things, of bringing the country in terms of how we're run into the 21st century. And what I see is a Conservative Party who conveniently picked it up because it suited and has decided that the old Etonian set could just go on running the country corruptly the way they have for decades.
I think that's a massively unfair representation of the Conservative
No, it's
Party.
worse than that. I agree with you.
No, absolutely not.
And I think when the PPE contracts come out and when we learn where all the money went, the 40 billion on test and trace, I hope a lot of people go to prison, frankly, for wasting billions of pounds of our money. It's the old guard, still running it. It's utterly unreformed. The bright hope is the 2019 intake. It's people like you that have come into politics, and I've met lots and lots of your colleagues.
Some incredible people.
And you've got some great people, some real people, came into politics in these red wall seats in 2019, and that gives me some hope. But the old guard's still in charge. So am I going to come back and give them all a good kicking again and teach them a lesson? Well, I got rid of the last Prime Minister. I hope to get rid of the Prime Minister before that. We'll have to see. Never say never. I did do it all once before.
And that's a threat if ever there was one.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and